All right, so today we are talking about multiplying and dividing integers. All right, so we've all done this before. Again, you can definitely use a calculator, but I'm going to talk you through how you want to do it. If you did not have a calculator or something like that. All right, so first thing, when you multiply integers, something that is different. All right, multiplying integers, the first thing you need to remember is that the order does not matter. Okay? The order does not matter. So, what that means, if you look at the example right there to the right on example 1, it says 2 times 4. However, you would get the same answer if you went 4 times 2. That is something that's a little bit different. It doesn't work that way in addition or subtraction, because if you switch those up, you get a completely different number. Okay, but it does not matter for, or excuse me, let me back that up. It doesn't matter, order doesn't matter for addition and multiplying, but it does for subtraction and division. All right, so those are the big things that happens there. So order does not matter here. Okay, now the other thing that is big to remember is there are different symbols. Okay. There are a lot of different ways and symbols to show multiplication. So I'm going to give you some examples here. Okay, the first one is an X. You could have 2 times 4. Okay, could have 2 times 4. Now, do you see that a lot as you've gotten older in math? No. Why not? Does anybody know? You're right there. Yeah, it's mixed up right there with the variable. X for multiplication looks just like an X for a variable. Okay, so we tend not to do that. We tend to do it a couple different ways. One way is we will use a dot. That is absolutely correct. So we could go 2 times 4. Okay, where it's a dot. Now, another way that you could see it, because teachers will do it this way, especially if they have a computer, they will use an asterisk. Okay, an asterisk is this little star-looking thing. Okay, so it could be written like that. All right. Another way that you can see multiplication is they could just use parentheses. And they could use it a couple different ways. So they could use parentheses 2, parentheses around both of them, like here. They could actually do parentheses around one of them. So it could be parentheses or it could be the other way. All right, but what you need to know is that each one of these is a different way to represent multiplication. Y'all got it? Okay, so there it is. So typically, guys, I'll be honest, I'm generally a parentheses guy. Okay, but as you get older, and I guess as you get more along in math, another way and a final way that you can do it, and I want to show you right here, is if there is a variable, it could just be a 2 and an X where they write them next to each other. And maybe I shouldn't use X there. Let me use a different letter just to get that point across. It could be a 2 and a Y. But right there, that's saying 2 times Y. So when you use a variable, you can also just kind of write it out there with nothing between them. But if they're 2 numbers, it's got to be done in one of those ways that I showed you there. Okay, so let's take a look real quick at some of these examples. All right, so generally, you've got to remember multiplication is just taking those things and it's saying that you have a certain number of sets. Okay, so like right here, when we say 2 times 4, we're saying we have 2 sets of 4. Or if you think about it the other way, we're saying we have 4 sets of 2. So it's an expedient way of really adding. is all multiplication is, okay? So as you look at this, feel free to use your calculator, go on and so forth. I know we learned some of these, but if you didn't, you can absolutely use a calculator. So right here, 2 times 4 will get you what? 8. That is correct. Now, some other things that I didn't cover over here on the left-hand side because I wanted to save for the examples. On example 2, how many negative numbers do we have here? 2. So I want you to make a little note. 2 negatives equals a positive. So when you're multiplying 2 negative numbers, that will turn into a positive number. Okay? So right here in example 2, you have a -3 and a -7. When you multiply those, you do get 21, but since they were both negative, it turns into a positive 21. Good job. All right. Now, looking at example 3, how many negative numbers do you have? 1. Uh-oh. So when you only have one negative, when they are different signs, okay, you're going to end up with a negative number. So I know right now I could come over here and write negative because I know my answer is going to be negative. But then if I do 5 times 6, I would get a 30. Okay, so a note you might want to jot down there is opposite signs equals a negative number. Opposite signs equals a negative number. Okay? Now, same thing right here on example 4. It's very similar. The negative is just in the front, but we still know that means that I will end up with a negative number. And 9 times 5 is 45. That is correct. All right? Any questions on any of those? All right, we're going to have plenty of time to practice and get some of that going here in a second. All right? Okay. So, next thing right here is when we look at dividing. Okay? Very similar as we were just talking about here. However, with dividing, we need to remember that the order matters. Okay? Order matters. Because 2 divided by 1 does not equal 1 divided by 2. There's an example for you there. 2 divided by 1 is different than 1 divided by 2. All right? So, know that's going on there. All right, now, some symbols, some ways to describe it. So, wow, spelled symbols wrong. There we go. Okay, very similar. So we've talked about one of them. One of them is a fraction, so it's a fraction bar. Another one is the old school division. And then sometimes it'll even be listed as like a slash, all right, depending on where it is. But any of those all means that. And then we'll go ahead for this just so we have a little bit more room. A reminder. When they have the same sign, it equals a positive number. And when they have different signs, it equals a negative number. Okay, so that's just a little reminder. Same sign as a positive number, different signs are a negative number. Okay, so that falls just in line with multiplication. All right, so those will tie on and go together. Is everybody good? You need me to slow down for a second? We're good? Okay. All right, so then what we're going to do here is I want you to take a look. Let's work out these examples, and then we'll talk about them. Number 1, okay, and again, so kind of to describe division, It's the opposite. It's figuring out, hey, here's your total number. Well, how many copies of that number did it take to get there? Type deal. All right, or how many sets of numbers did it take to get there? So here you have 49 and -7. Okay, the number on top is the number that you always divide into. All right, so that's the number that you will take, and you're going to see how many of the bottom will go into the top. All right, so we know that 49 divided by 7 is really just the number 7. However, they are one positive and one negative, so it's a -7. Good job. All right. Same thing here with number 2. You've got a -8 and a +2, so you know right away it's going to be -4. 8 divided by 2 is -4. Okay. Number 3, you got 2 positives, so you know it's going to stay positive. Well, 54 divided by 6 ends up being 9. That is correct. And then the last one, the one that is very tricky with division, and it's not as long as you remember the rule, these are both negative. So it's going to turn into a positive. A lot of students, when they see the 2 negatives, be like, bang, my answer's got to be negative. I know that one. All right. It's different than when you're adding 2 negative numbers. All right. So 2 negatives means it's going to be positive. 40 divided by 5 is 8. Okay. So that is really all that we had to cover today with just multiplying and dividing. So now what we're going to do is take some time and work on our homework.